Okay, may as well start. I think some people joined the module after Tuesday, so if you're one of the joiners, I have some copies of the syllabus and some copies of the opinion of the Advocate General in the Budapest Bank case, if you wish to grab a copy of those during the break. Okay. Okay, I guess, I don't have enough syllabus. But what I'll do is I'll make some more and they'll hand them. And they'll make some. You got that? You have two of those, so she needs one. You have two, she needs one. Well, she needs that. Okay, we'll give that to her. I have no more syllabuses. I'll leave some of the TSSO. Yeah, the syllabus, with that, okay. Anybody not got a syllabus? Okay, then I don't need to make any copies and leave with the TSSO. Good. Okay. In any event, they're available on the Blackboard as well. Okay. Now, last time, sorry I'm a bit sort of throaty and congested. Last time we began the discussion of the product and geographic market. In other words, market definition. Now, I really can't stress enough how essential market definition is in competition analysis. Okay? Every adequate analysis of a competition case begins with some aspect of market definition. Market definition stresses the parameters of competition. All competition between goods and services is done on a market, and the market has at least two dimensions: the product dimension and the geographic dimension. The product dimension, or the product market, is an analysis of what goods or services are competing. Okay? In other words, what are we concerned with, and what can consumers substitute for it? Okay? Or what can producers do to enter the market if the price of the good or service in question becomes more expensive? The geographic market is where competition takes place. Okay? And in other words, where the conditions of competition are sufficiently homogeneous, sufficiently the same, so that the taste, cultures, the transportation costs, whatever, are such that competition is there, but it's different in other places. Product market and geographic market. Okay, for instance, I used the illustration last time of being invited to dinner. Say a weekend dinner where I invited for dinner in France. What I could bring as a complimentary beverage, as a beverage to complement dinner, is severely restricted. It would be wine. Okay? So what in those circumstances is substitutable? What products would be different? Well, it would be between a choice of various wines. I couldn't substitute beer, cider, or hard spirits. Certainly not. Were I invited for a similar meal outside of France, say in the Netherlands or Germany or the UK, the choice of beverage I could bring is different, so there could be some other substitutes. Now note the geography is different too. Why is that? Why are conditions of substitution, of competition, different in France than they are in, say, Germany, the Netherlands, or the UK? Because of, among other things, cultural tastes, okay? Another example. I wish to buy concrete, cement, for some construction that I'm doing. Okay? My choice is very restricted. I really can't substitute asphalt, the stuff you put on roads, for concrete, the stuff you build buildings out of, right? Okay, and if my architect calls for cement or concrete, I can't use a wood frame building, for instance. Okay, so there's very little substitution product-wise. And geographically, the geographic dimensions of the concrete market are very small. Why? Transportation costs, exactly. Concrete is fairly cheap. It's the cost of its, mixing it and having that truck that keeps it sort of from setting, and then dragging it to your construction site. So I can't really order concrete from Scotland, say. It has to be fairly local. Okay? So relevant market is absolutely essential. Now the real problem is in a competition law problem, if you get the relevant market wrong, you get off to use that expression, you get off the rails really early. Okay? Now, for your purposes, for exam purposes, okay, your purposes, first of all, for exam purposes, all you'll really need to do is in a fact-based question, a problem question, is to say that the market here is this, product market is this, geographic market is probably that, and then move on. I'm looking really, to use that god-awful English expression, it's a tick box exercise. Show me that you understand that the product market and geographic market definition is one of the first things you do, mention it and move on. For your purposes, for the practice of competition law, this is not something that lawyers really engage in. Okay? Lawyers will hire economists to perform this sort of analysis. And economists will in turn hire survey or market companies to get the data they need. Okay? So this is not a legal question per se. It's not an exclusively legal question. There's a significant factual element to it, and it's a factual element that you let those who have expertise in addressing those facts answer the question. Okay? So you'll hire a company, an economics consulting company, to answer this question in real life, and then bill the cost to your client. Okay? A lot of what you do in competition law, you also do with the help of either economists or accountants or other professionals. Okay? Okay, now, in terms of the analysis of product and geographic market, you should look at, and I believe I brought my copy, but I probably handed it to somebody. No, I didn't. The commission notice on the definition of the relevant market. Now in the syllabus, you recall, I mentioned on page, let me find the page, it would be page 13. The first part of page 13, you'll see under A1, you'll see collections of regulations and soft law. The European Commission's competition law rules. First volume includes this definition, this guidance paper. Okay? So it's in there. If you haven't downloaded those collections of regulations, download them this afternoon. Okay? Commission notice is in there. Have a read through it. Okay? Now, as I said, a commission notice merely binds the commission on how it interprets the law. It doesn't bind the court, and it doesn't bind national competition authorities, and it now doesn't bind the UK. But this is a very accurate assessment or understanding of what is done in market definition. Furthermore, as someone asked last time, market definition is universal. This sort of analysis will be applied whether it's done by a European authority, a member state authority, a non-European authority, an American authority, a Canadian authority, a Korean authority, a Chinese authority, an Indian authority. You get the picture. It's the same throughout the world. Okay? So this we can transfer. Okay. Product market, geographic market. Now we went through the definition. Now it's best that we also look at sort of the case law in point. The leading European case is the United Brands case. Has anybody had a look at the UBC, United Brands Corporation? Has anybody had a read of this case? No, it's in the syllabus. You really should read this case. Okay? It's key. What was going on in United Brands? And nobody's read it? Okay, nobody has any idea. Okay. What was going on in United Brands was really simple. It involved the distribution of bananas in the EU. Okay. Now there are a number of goods that you could do an entire course in EU law, and not just competition law, but I think you could probably teach the entirety of EU law by looking at bananas, at least EU free movement of goods law, by looking at bananas and alcohol. Okay? Seriously. The problem with bananas in the EU is that, of course, the EU came together in what year? When did you get the Treaty of Rome? 57. Okay? Now, that was post-World War II attempt really to harmonize the internal market, break down borders for goods and services within Europe. But part of the problem is that even after the Second World War, the European countries were carrying a lot of their colonial baggage. Okay? France had former colonies abroad. Portugal wasn't in. The UK had former colonies. Okay? Belgium had a few former colonies. Okay? And typically, colonial powers would give colonial preferences for imports to their former colonies. And bananas, of course, don't really grow in Europe, but were grown in the former colonies. And the UK had joined by this time UK colonies. So the banana market was a bit difficult given these former colonial preferences regarding the import and distribution of bananas and how bananas would cross the border once they got into the EEC, as it then was. Yeah. Now, in UBC, United Brands, we know about United Brands, Chiquita Bananas. Okay, they're the owners of the Chiquita banana label. United Brands had a huge worldwide banana, how should we say, operation. They had banana plantations in multiple tropical countries. This allowed them to diversify the risk because, of course, one of the problems in tropical countries, particularly in Caribbean countries, is hurricanes, which can destroy your plantation. But if you have many plantations, you diversify that risk. UBC had a strong fleet of banana ships, being able to, basically banana boats, take the bananas to Europe. Okay, their own integrated logistics division. United Brands had the advantage of the Chiquita brand label, recognizable, right? You go to the store, you see Chiquita. That's one of the two big labels. The other one being Dole. That's mainly, that at the time was mainly American. Okay? Now what United Brands was doing, because of its power in the banana market, United Brands was able, and what they were doing was they were shipping the bananas to Hamburg. Hamburg is a big port. Okay, shipping it from the Caribbean, from their plantations to Germany. And then from Germany, shipping the bananas throughout the European communities. Now the problem is that they would ship bananas to Germany, then take those bananas, ship them to Ireland to sell in Ireland, and that they would sell them in Ireland at a lower price than they would sell them in Germany, even though there was an additional charge in the shipping or cost to the shipping, right? So in effect, what United Brands was doing was engaging in a form of price discrimination, selling bananas more expensively in Germany than in Ireland. Okay? And in addition, was using national borders, right? German was in effect imposing borders. German bananas for sale in Germany versus bananas for sale in Ireland. Imposing borders in that way is, in the European project, a big no-no. Okay, right? Freedom of goods, flow of goods. Okay. And then, in addition to all of this, okay, the United Brands was, and we won't get into that today, was imposing restrictions on its on resale of its bananas. So, for instance, a German couldn't go to Ireland to buy it, and they get it back to Germany cheaper. Now, the relevant problem in the case for today's discussion is United Brands' position on the market. United Brands was alleged to be dominant, to be very powerful on the European banana market. And because of its power on the European banana market, was able to charge different prices in different parts of the market. Okay? But if you're making an allegation, a claim, that United Brands is powerful on a particular market, you need to, and in particular the banana market, you need to first identify the product market. What market is it? It's bananas. Why are bananas different from other fruit? And second, the geographic market. Why is it that United Brands, what's different in competition such that so that United Brands can charge one price, get away with charging one price in Ireland and a greater price in Germany? Okay. So in order to do that, okay, the Commission first and then the court needed to look at both the product and the geographic market associated with bananas in Europe. Geographic market was treated first. Geographic market is defined in paragraph 11 of the decision. Opportunities for competition under Article 86, that's now Article 102, must be considered having regard to the particular features of the product in question and in reference to a clearly defined geographic area. Okay? So the geographic area is where the conditions of competition are sufficiently homogeneous, sufficiently the same for the effect of the economic power of the undertaking to be evaluated. So it's that area, that geographic area where competition is sufficiently the same. Okay? Now, and this really just emphasizes paragraph 44, you need to sort of clearly delimit that part of the common market where the conditions of competition are the same for all traders. Ireland, you can see why Ireland might be a separate geographic market from the rest of Europe. Why? Same with the UK. Well, the UK, yeah, the UK.
It's not connected to the mainland.
Exactly. Transportation. How do you get stuff to Ireland? Ship. Or you fly it. But this was about 74. Ship. Anybody here been to Ireland? No. Okay. It's not bad. Dublin's nice. Expensive. I lived in Ireland in the north for 2.5 years. Dublin's expensive. It's nice. But you got to get a plane. Or a boat. And that adds cost. You can't just put it on a truck in Hamburg and haul it there. Okay? Now, you look at evidence to define geographic market, as the court says, past diversion of orders, demand characteristics, views of customers, current pattern of purchases, trade flows, where does stuff shift to, barriers and switching, costs. Okay. Now, a geographic market can be as small as a local market. I gave you the example of cement. That's a very concrete. It's a very small market, right? Okay. It can be worldwide. Okay. I've given you the first tutorial. We'll look at market definitions for you to just work out intuitively a market definition of things. I believe what's the geographic market for an iTunes download? What do you need to get an iTunes download?
Worldwide.
Pardon?
Worldwide.
Worldwide. What do you need to get it?
Internet.
Internet and a bank card, basically, right? Or a gift certificate from the iStore or whatever they call it. It's worldwide. Transportation costs are cheap. Okay? A few things with worldwide markets, but you'll have a look at that. Okay, now, there's UBC. Now, UBC asks, in the terms of the product market, do bananas sit in their own market? Are they somehow different from other fruit? Okay. Do they? Okay. Now, why is this important? Why?
Because if you say it's the same as all other fruits, it's a completely different market. You would compare it to all other fruit distributors, whereas if it's just bananas, just other banana distributors.
Exactly. Exactly. That's right. If bananas can be substituted for other fruit, okay, then what? Then the fact that UBC is playing with prices in one market is less of a problem because customers can switch. Okay, or producers can get into other fruit. Okay, but if bananas are somehow distinct and you can't switch away from bananas, or customers don't switch away from bananas, then you focus on bananas. Okay, so paragraph 22. For the banana to be regarded as forming a market which is sufficiently differentiated from other fruit markets, it must be possible for it to be singled out by such special features, be distinguishing it from other fruits. So they're looking at what is unique, what is special about bananas, okay, to make it less interchangeable with, say, apples or pears or strawberries. Okay. Now, the court looks at characteristics of bananas. First characteristic of bananas, bananas are a year-round fruit. Okay, and this is in the, I guess this was 76, the case was filed. So it probably arose out of a dispute at about 72, 73. And that was the days before people were flying in fruit and vegetables from all over the world, okay? The carbon footprint of fruit wouldn't be that bad. Now, if you go to the store and look and see where your fresh fruit and vegetable is, they're different, okay? But nevertheless, bananas are a year-round fruit. They were then, they still are now. You can go to the grocery store any month of the year and find bananas, right? Okay? Unlike the other fruit, which tends to be seasonal. Try buying fresh strawberries right now. Pretty difficult, okay? Now, given that you can get bananas year-round, you need to think about substituting bananas at any point in the year. Okay? Now, there's limited seasonal substitutability. Okay? In other words, when peaches and what they did in order to get this is the commission engaged in some market surveys, went and looked at various consumers' tastes in member states. Okay? And they found that there is very little seasonal substitutability is a bit limited between bananas and peaches and table grapes. Okay? In Germany. Okay? So that when peaches and table grapes are available at the stores, the Germans would willingly substitute them for bananas. But nobody else. And only those two fruits, and only when they were in season, clearly. Okay, so there's limited seasonal substitutability. Now, for year-round fruits, okay, the only other fruits that the commission said were available throughout the year were oranges and apples. Okay. The first are not interchangeable. People didn't regard an orange as an adequate substitute for a banana. And apples, people thought, well, yeah, sort of. Not a great substitute. Like the choice, I throw an apple in my lunch or a banana in my lunch. Yeah, it's not a great comparison. But comparing bananas to apples, I guess. Now, this is interesting. Okay, this is the fun part of the decision. Paragraphs 30 and 31. Okay? But even if there's some small degree of substitutability, bananas have other characteristics, okay, which influence consumer choices. And paragraph 31 is great, okay? If you don't remember anything about this course, or only one thing about this course, paragraph 31, okay? The banana has certain characteristics, appearances, taste, softness, seedlessness, easy handling, a consistent level of production which enables it to satisfy the consistent needs of an important section of the population, consisting of the very young, the old, and the sick. So babies, old people, and sick people can eat bananas and nobody else eats it. And they can't eat anything else. Therefore, there's no substitute for bananas. Yes?
With that though, couldn't you, if we're going based on like the taste and appearance, could you say almost every fruit except for like the different types of apples and like oranges and tangerines, they're all kind of their own market? Because I don't go saying, I'm in the mood for an apple, I can't find it, I'll substitute it for an orange.
Right.
Aren't they all so completely different,
Yeah, okay.
every fruit?
Yeah, that's... You're correct. Yeah, if you've really got a hankering for a banana, nothing's going to satisfy it but a banana, okay? If somebody offers you an apple, you'll probably say, yeah, thanks, but no thanks, okay? But if you want some sort of fruit and the banana isn't there, so if your preferences aren't as strong, then an apple or a pear might be substitutable. Right? Okay. So obviously, okay, bananas aren't perfect substitute. Sorry, apples or pears aren't perfect substitute for bananas, because in the strong preferences, you can't switch them.
I'm just thinking, wouldn't that logic apply for any other fruit though? Like
Well-
if you move an apple, a banana won't.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is it applies, this logic applies in all substitutions, okay? Okay, if two things are perfect substitutes for each other, going back to last lecture, the cross-price elasticity is 1, right? You can substitute one for the other, no problems. There are very few things in this world with a cross-price elasticity of 1, okay? The closer to 1 it is, the better the substitute it is. Now, the reason things approach 1 but don't get to 1 is because of these strong preferences. Okay? So in a lot of cases, pears won't be a good substitute for bananas, so the cross-price elasticity has to be less than 1, but it can still be fairly high. So and similar with every other fruit. Does that sort of...
Yeah.
Okay. Now, here's the problem with this. Okay? What's the problem? What's the real problem with 31? With the reasoning.
Does that mean every single kind of fruit has their specific product market? Because every kind of fruit has this distinctive character.
Well, if you have a strong preference for a particular kind of fruit, okay, nothing is substitutable for it. Okay? If you have a strong preference for anything, nothing is substitutable for it. Right? So if, on the other hand, for instance, if you really want raspberries, even a strawberry won't be a substitute for it. Okay? For some reason you want raspberries on your ice cream. Not strawberries, raspberries. Okay? But what this shows is that there's no absolute interchangeability among fruit. Okay? Because people have strong preferences at times. But a lot of the time, or a fair amount of people, don't have these strong preferences. Okay? So, in the absence of strong preferences, there is some substitutability. You may be out of strawberries for the ice cream topping, and raspberries might be a substitute. So in the absence of, oh, I really don't like I really don't want raspberries over strawberries, unless that you can get some substitutability. Okay? But sometimes they're just not going to work. Okay? Now the fact is, what they're saying is, for what the commission, the court is saying is to look for the sick, for the babies, the old, and the sick. Nothing else but bananas work. Okay, therefore, bananas are completely different from other fruit. Okay? The inference here is a bit problematic, the commission's reasoning. Because you look at a very small area, a small part of the market, small number of banana consumers. Okay? What percentage of bananas are consumed by the very young, the very old, and the very sick? Very small, one would guess. I mean, we don't know. But I would say, we would hazard to say, if you look, go to the grocery store and look at people buying, you get asked, but very, very small. But to make an inference that bananas are different based upon the consumption patterns of a small number of the consumers is problematic. You would want to make an inference about it on a larger portion, larger percentage of banana consumers. Okay? But it's still kind of interesting. Okay? The other thing that's interesting here, or is important, is the introduction of temporal considerations in the banana market. The idea of seasonability and seasonal substitutes. Okay? This is significant. Markets other than bananas might have seasonal characteristics. And substitutability may be possible in some seasons, may not be possible in some seasons. Example. Suppose I want to have sometime this week a turkey breast for dinner. Okay, I go to the grocery store. I see there's no turkey breasts available. I'm likely to substitute a chicken breast, right? No, I'm not asking you, right? Yeah, I'm telling you, yeah, I am. It's my preference, damn it. Okay, so I am. Okay, now imagine it's a different month, December. I want to have a turkey breast on Christmas Day. Not that I'm particularly liking Christmas. My middle name is Scrooge, but that's what you do, where people want to have turkey on Christmas. Is chicken an adequate substitute on the 25th of December? No. It's like bringing beer to dinner in France. No. Okay? So again, these time seasonal considerations can affect market substitutability. Holidays, specific things. Okay, now we'll turn. Now that any questions on market definition? Have an idea of substitutability, okay, of between the product or service and other products or service. Have an idea of an area of where competition takes place, and essentially that's what you need to know for answering an exam question. When you're in practice, these sorts of questions will be addressed by other professionals, such as economists. Elements of Article 101 we'll turn to, and we'll get on to this time. Even if we are running late, we can catch up next week, because I think I've got 3 lectures for cartels. And we really never, only really need about 2. Okay? Elements of 101. Now look, this is the outline of what we need to know about 101. Competition provisions in the treaty. Look at Article 101 generally. In particular, we'll look at Article 101.1, the notion of an undertaking, agreement or concerted practice, effect on trade. There's also the object and effect distinction forms the focus of a separate lecture. Later on, we'll look at Article 101.3, which is looks at the criteria for an exemption from 101. Have you read Article 101 yet? Yes. If you haven't, during the break, read it. Okay? I'd advise you to print it out and put it fairly close to the beginning of your notes, particularly the notes that you're going to bring into the exam. 101 and 102 you should have in front of you. Okay, let's look at the competition provisions in the treaties. Okay, the first interesting provision is not in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, but it's on the other treaty, the Treaty on the European Union. At the beginning of that treaty, a number of the Union's goals are set out. And they're set out in what are known as linking clauses, sort of pointing out the various goals and somehow sort of trying to link them together. Article 3.3 of the TEU states the Union shall establish an internal market. Okay, that is the 4 freedoms of the market. It shall work for sustainable development of Europe, based on balanced economic growth and price stability. What's price stability code for? What do you think it's code for?
No fixed prices.
No, that's not a competition. This is a more general economic term. How about a moderate rate of inflation? What was one of the main problems in the interwar German economy? Inflation. Okay. Inflation got out of control. Okay, and a result. Well, that was one of a number of economic problems. So price stability, that's moderate to low inflation. What's the inflation target? Anybody have any idea? Europeans, the ECB's inflation target? Any ideas? Pick a number. 2%. Okay. So moderate, so the prices go up, wages go up, because it looks good at the end of the year when your wage goes up. Okay. Prices have to go up to sort of match it, okay? You don't want inflation going down, because then your boss justifies your wage going down, which is a real bummer, even though your standard of living is the same if prices went down. Okay, a highly competitive social market economy. Okay, that's also code. Okay, that's code for an ordoliberal approach to the economy. What is ordoliberalism? It's discussed in the first part of both of the textbooks. Okay, and this is a view of the economy, of politics, or political economy that emerged in Germany really during the interwar period and during the Second World War. Primarily in the southwest in Germany, in Freiburg, in the Black Forest there. Okay. Freiburg was nice because it was sort of out of the way of Berlin and what was happening there, and with a certain and the rector of the university basically allowed for freer thought than most German universities at the time. Ordoliberalism was the view, or is a view, among other things, that concentrations of power, whether the power is a political power or an economic power, are bad for the individual and bad for society. Okay? So the ordoliberal approach was an approach to the economy that's skeptical of political intervention and is skeptical of and is concerned by the effects of large economic entities in the economy. Okay? It was very influential in the German contingent that drafted the European treaties, and also in the initial administration of the Commission and the EEC in the late 50s, early 60s. Okay? Aiming at full employment and social progress, no codes there, and a high level of protection and improvement of the quality of the environment. It shall promote scientific and technical advance. Okay, so this sets up as one of the community's goals, or as part of the community's goals, that competition, okay, exists within other values. That's something that you should keep in mind, because one of the questions that has a nasty habit of showing up year upon year is about values in the European competition regime. Okay, that's probably a sufficient hint. Okay, now other provisions in the treaties, not just the competition, Protocol 27, okay, permits union action, okay, to essentially obtain the objectives set out in the treaty. It's under Article 352 and Protocol 27 that we have merger control. If you look at the articles in the treaties, you see we have Article 101 that deals with cartels. 102 deals with dominant firms, monopolies, but there are no treaty provisions for merger control. Merger control is done by regulation, and the legal basis for the regulation is Protocol 27 in Article 352. Okay. Cartels dominance, 103 enables for secondary legislation. 104 and 105 require consistency by member states in the application of competition rules. 106 is service of general economic interest. That's, for instance, universal services, such as perhaps a postal service, where there may be some cross-subsidization or some subsidization by the government. Articles 107 through 109 deal with the state aid provisions. State aid is government support for a firm or an industry. The problem with state aid, with the government supporting a firm or an industry, is that it's an unlevel playing field. The favored firm has a benefit, or the favored industry has a benefit. And of course, if Germany promotes one favored industry, that industry has a benefit over the French version of the same industry. Think automobiles. Okay. We're not going to do state aid. State aid is a separate module, and unfortunately, they don't let me run it. Okay. The old competition regime, I'll speak about this for a couple minutes, and then we'll have a break and we'll talk about the new competition regime. The old competition regime, the first regime, and that was imposed by Regulation 17 of 1962. You can read that for historic value. The old competition regime was a system of prior notification and clearance. That is to say, if undertakings wish to cooperate with each other or to engage in sort of practices by mutual agreement, they would have to notify their intention to the commission. Okay. The commission would examine their proposal and look at the consequences, the market consequences of the firm's proposed course of action. It would then approve it or prohibit it. If it thought consumers, etc., would benefit from it, it would approve it. If it didn't, it would prohibit it. Okay. The problem with the old regime is twofold. First, there was a significant delay in commission approval. In many cases, years. Around the end of last century, around the end of the 20th century, the beginning of the 21st century, before the new notification regimes, the UK Parliament, I believe it was the House of Lords, European Union Committee, commented on it, that these sorts of delays were unacceptable. Okay? So the Commission would have staff and offices in Brussels just looking at these documents, thinking yay or nay. Okay? Furthermore, this, in addition to the delay, was costly. You had a staff and offices vetting these applications. Okay? The real problem is that sucked away a large amount of, how should we say, hours of commission time. Straight off the top. And this significant use of resources, okay, couldn't be deployed in other ways. Take an example. Suppose your undertaking and another undertaking wanted to fix prices. Okay? Knowing full well that price fixing was a no-no. Okay? Are you going to notify the commission of your intent to fix prices? Yes or no? Sure. No, of course not. So you go do it anyways, and the problem is because the commission is involved in all of this vetting and approving process, they wouldn't have the manpower to go out and detect price fixing and enforcement, and to enforce it. So it was devoting this cost, sort of this hoover of a vacuum, was preventing stuff. So as of May of 24, a new regime came into place, and that is the regime under Regulation 1/2003. We'll stop here. We'll go through this regime and begin the elements after the break. If you haven't read 101, read it now. Okay? So about 10 minutes.
这个没有了，但是这个网上能当下来，我一会儿发给你，发给你这电子版的。网上能找到的。我直接发给你电子版的，我当下来了。
Yes. Question.
You're going to be available for office hours after the lecture, right?
That is my office hours.
Is it okay if I come speak? Because there's a couple of questions about like sort of the course in general.
Sure. That's what office hours are for. No, I have office hours, but you can't come and sit on. And just, give me, we'll wander over there and give me a minute to grab a couple of minutes to grab a couple of coffee. Yeah, so. Yes. What can I do for you?
Just one question about the two tests. The first one is about this cost price this test. It is useful to check whether the two products have the kind of relation.
Yeah, substitutability.
Yeah. Now, how about the snake test?
It's another way.
Is another way.
Yeah.
Is to
And
check.
what typically the
I'm
snip.
kind of thinking the two tests.
Okay.
don't-
The snip test will generally be used to determine what other markets may be
What else am I
substitutable.
supposed to- oh.
What other products may be substitutable, and the cross-price elasticity of demand is how substitutable are these.
This means in this test it's presumed that they have two products to check whether product A and product B whether
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
substitutable.
Yeah. So you have a product X. Okay. What is in the market? Okay. What possible substitutes are there? SNP test gives you that A, B, and C are in the market, and then the cross-price elasticity tells you how substitutable, let's say, A is with X is.
Okay, so let's put inside the UBS
Case,
UBS
yeah.
case. Yeah. In this case, the snake test could use to check whether the banana have other substitute
Exactly.
products, to check whether what kind of product this is.
Yeah.
Like the
Banana, whether it's grape, so in the West German example, table grapes and apples, let's say.
Yes.
Oh yeah, okay. And then, so that would be the SNP test. The cross-price elasticity would tell how substitutable they are.
Okay, get
Okay.
it. Thank you.
Okay. About 10 minutes of fame over. Okay, now, Regulation 1, 2003 came into effect March 1st, 2004. May 1st, 2004. Okay, changed the regimes. Came in May 1st, 2004. Why? You wouldn't have any ideas. Because that's when the European Union expanded. So with a larger expansion, it was felt the appropriate time to change the enforcement of the EU's competition regime. Have a read through Regulation 1, 2003, okay? Key sections are articles for our purposes today are Article 1. Article 1 states, and this is nothing new, it states what the case law has always said, is that the competition provisions have direct effect. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, where's my people who have studied EU law before? Oh, we had one last time, I guess they...
Isn't it that they directly apply to all member states and they have to sort of incorporate this law into the national legislation?
Close. It's even more. It applies that any, not just member states. It doesn't require. That's a directive that a member state has to, but a direct effect. Okay.
Members are bound by the regulations.
That's getting there. What it means is that an individual can rely on the provisions of the treaties before a national court. So I can sue on the basis of this. Okay, I still can. It's still applicable in the UK right now, notwithstanding what happened on Friday night. It's still applicable, so I can sue on that basis. Okay? I don't have to wait for the government to transpose it into a statute or a regulation before I can rely on it. Okay? Some EU provisions, okay, have require member states to transpose them into national law. A directive, for instance, has to be transposed. Okay. Some provisions of the treaties are interpretive. They don't necessarily give legal rights. For instance, the article I put up, TEU 33, that doesn't have direct effect, but it tells judges, or gives judges an idea of how maybe they should interpret things. But Articles 101 and 102 have direct effect. They give rise to immediate legal rights and can be relied on as between individuals, between myself and a firm that's fixing prices, let's say. So it can give rise to a basis for damage claims if I'm harmed as a result of somebody's price fixing. Okay? Article 1 of the regulation 1/2003 sets this up, or states this. Article 2 of 2000 of this regulation imposes the burden of proof, and it's the normal burdens of proof that we have. That if there's an allegation that there's a violation, the proof is on usually the commission or the competition enforcement agency, the national agency, or on the plaintiff to establish that there's a violation. But any defense must be, the burden of establishing a defense is on the undertaking that wishes to avail itself of this. This is relevant to Article 101(3), which sets up a potential defense or an escape from 101(1) liability. Articles 23 and 24 indicate some penalties, and we'll get to that next week when we talk about problems, hardcore cartel problems, and also when we talk about 102. Penalties can be significant. Firms have been fined billions for violating the competition rules. Don't believe me? Just ask Google. Okay? Yeah, don't even Google it. Just Google has put in more money into the EU's coffers than some smaller member states have over the past few years. Okay, as a result of their violations. Article 101, let's go over that. There are 3 paragraphs, 101.1, 101.2, and 101.3. Article 101.1 is the prohibition against certain forms of collusion or working together. Article 101.2 is a declaration of nullity, and Article 101.3 sets up some exceptions. Let's deal with these sort of in turn. Article 101, there's 2 aspects to it. There's a general prohibition, and there's a list of what's known as hardcore violations. Okay. The general prohibition states, the following shall be prohibited as incompatible with the internal markets. Okay, now I've highlighted a number of words or phrases. And the reason for this is these phrases, these words and phrases, have significance to to the interpretation of competition law. So the following are prohibited. All agreements. So we need a definition. What do we mean by agreements? Between undertakings. Okay. Decisions by associations of undertakings. And concerted practices. What's a concerted practice? Okay. Which may affect trade between member states. So we need an understanding of the concept of trade between member states, and which have as their object or effect, that's a biggie, the notion of a distinction between an object or effect and the consequences, which we'll get to. And I suggest read the Advocate General's opinion here. The prevention, restriction, or distortion of competition within the internal market, and in particular, then we get our hardcore restrictions. Directly or indirectly fixed purchase or selling practices. So prices or any other trading practices. Prices. Okay, so price fixing. Okay. Now price fixing works both ways. You can fix it as a seller, which is the common way of seeing it, or buyers can get together and fix buying prices. Okay? I gave my undergraduates a mock exam question that involved fixing of buying prices, and they were all freaked out because they hadn't read this carefully enough. Okay? Well, we didn't do buying prices, I can't do. Read the law, read the article, okay? It was, I don't know if it still is, in both the Spanish and the Italian tobacco industry. The cigarette manufacturers were fixing the buying prices of raw tobacco for the tobacco farmers. Okay? And then to make it worse, they were fixing the prices of the cigarettes. So they got both ends coming and going. Okay? So that's cartel. Price fixing cartels limit or control production, markets, technical development, or interests. Okay? So that's another way, another restriction on competition. Right? You control output, that has the same as raising the price, as we saw last Monday. Controlling markets, this is dividing markets here. Okay? I take France, you take Germany. They can have the Netherlands, you can have Belgium and Luxembourg. Okay? I'll sell there, and only I sell there. You stay out of there, you stay out of my markets, I'll stay out of your markets. Okay, technical development or investment, in other words, standstills on producing better. Sharing markets or sources of supply, that's similar to that. Apply dissimilar conditions to equivalent trading transactions with other trading partners, placing them in a competitive disadvantage. That can be a form of price discrimination. Okay, and E is a form of tying. Make the conclusion of contracts subject to acceptance of other parties' obligations which have no connection. If you want to buy this, you have to buy that as well. I'm not going to sell you A without you buying B. Those are hardcore restrictions. Generally speaking, and I say generally, I mean sort of a global consensus, and in particular a European position, is that these sorts of arrangements tend to have absolutely no benefit to consumers. Okay, and that's why they're explicitly mentioned, prohibited, and referred to as hardcore restrictions. Now, so that's Article 101. We'll unpack that, start unpacking that in a couple of minutes. Not Article 101, it's Article 101.1. Article 101.2, very simple. It states that any agreement or decision prohibited by Article 101 is void. Now we know that that's automatic and it has direct effect. So you can rely on this in a national court. Okay? So that, what that means is that any contract, any agreement, okay, that contains an anti-competitive condition, that anti-competitive condition is void. So that provision is void. To the extent that the offending provision is severable from the rest of the contract, this is basic contract law. To the extent that that provision is severable from the contract, the remaining terms will survive. If the provision cannot be severed, the entire contract is void. And as a matter of contract law, that's a matter of national law. There is no European Union law of contract. There are member state laws of contract. Okay, and so that's a matter for the national court to determine. Okay? So severability is a matter. Now, this can be used and has been used, and we'll see some uses of it as a defense to a claim. It's known as the Euro defense. Okay. You will see it in Courage and Crehan. It was used, and it was attempted to be used in the Pronuptia decision. Okay. Usually these are cases where an individual, a smaller company or an individual, usually is or has entered into a contract with a larger concern, with a larger company, and makes an allegation that the that the contract written by the larger company has anti-competitive consequences, violates 101. And then they use this claim as a means of either getting out of the contract or not meeting an obligation under the contract. In the Courage and Crehan case, which we'll get to later, involved Mr. Crehan, who ran a pub, about the royalties that he had to pay to the Courage Brewing Company. In the Pronuptia case, which we'll get to again later on, it involved somebody in a franchise agreement in a bridal goods store. Bridal wear store. Okay. Article 101.3 involves some exceptions. When it says that in an agreement that may be otherwise anti-competitive will be regarded as acceptable so long as consumers gain from it. We'll get to this probably in about 2 weeks. Okay. The first jurisdictional element we have to look at is the nature of an undertaking. What is an undertaking? This is a European word. It's not, undertaking. It's a word that we English, not so big. Okay, don't confuse it with undertaker. Okay, two different concepts. Okay. An undertaking, okay, an undertaking is just European speak for a firm, a business, a commercial concern. Okay? The concept of an undertaking, and this is one of the leading cases of the Hofner and Elser case, it involves every entity engaged in economic activity. Okay? Regardless of the legal status of the entity, the way in which it's financed, and according to Hofner and Elser, it was about employment agencies. And it included that employment agencies were undertakings. Okay. What this means is that if you, and by you, it could be a company, it could be a nonprofit society, it could be a sole proprietor, it could be a partnership, it could be a charity, whatever. If you are operating on the market in a commercial, doing economic activities, commercial activities, then you are, according to EU competition laws, an undertaking. So it looks at a functional approach. Okay? It looks at what the entity is doing. If it's operating on the market in a commercial manner, then it's an undertaking. It does not look at the type of organization it is, whether it's a PLC, a German AG, a not-for-profit concern, a society, a university, or a sole proprietor, or an estate. The estate of Luciano Pavarotti is an undertaking. The estate of Roy Orbison is definitely an undertaking. His widow is maximizing that one. Okay? How it's financed. It doesn't look if it's by debt, by equity, whether it's making money, losing money, whether it's non-profit, whether it's a company limited by guarantee. That's irrelevant. Doesn't look at its profit motive. Okay, whether it intends to make money, intends to lose money, a charity, or break even, a charity. It's irrelevant. Okay? And it's also functional but relative to what the undertaking, what the entity is doing at a given time. Okay? You look at the function in question. Okay? The University of Manchester. Okay? It's there as a university, research, teaching, but it's also an undertaking. Okay? Recruiting students, paying staff, buying books, renting accommodation. Okay? Insofar in these latter functions, and so it's operating in these latter functions, it acts as an undertaking. Okay? The NHS buys medicines, pays staff. In those aspects, it's likely an undertaking. Very few entities operating on the market haven't been regarded as an undertaking. The Spanish health care system, in some of its aspects, was held not to be an undertaking, but I'll get to that in a minute. Okay? A few organizations held not to be undertakings. Eurocontrol. Okay? You know what Eurocontrol does? Eurocontrol coordinates airspace usage in Europe. Okay, coordinates flights, so if you want to fly from Manchester to Dubai, right, you got to fly over Europe. Eurocontrol sort of organizes the various national air traffic control regimes. Okay, so it plans and coordinates national policies, and of course it's not free to fly over the country. They charge money. We know that. Okay, overflight fees, and so Eurocontrol collects it and dishes it out, right? So, but Eurocontrol was held not to be an undertaking because it's mainly research planning and coordination, and this collection of money was a sort of ancillary. It was just easier for you to pay one European fee as opposed to paying a fee to, let's say, UK, Netherlands, Germany, Austria, Romania, et cetera, when you're flying over. Okay. Poussey is another case. Poussey involved a pension system, okay, where you paid in money relative to your incomes, and then upon retirement drew out money, but the amount you drew out was independent of your contributions. Okay, and it was based upon the principle of solidarity. Everybody got the same at the end, irrespective of how much you contributed during your working life. And because of the solidarity aspect of it, the court held it not to be an undertaking. Other cases, the Colli and Figli was anti-pollution services in the port of Genoa. Okay, it was held to be, in effect, the exercise of police powers regarding environmental enforcement. Okay, it was not an economic power, not an economic activity. Okay. Likewise, the theme of the Spanish healthcare system involving purchasing of supplies was not. That's a bit odd. But in the UK, the decision went the other way. Okay. Now, there's a very good article on the notion of undertaking. If you're interested, Okio Dudus has on page 26, there's a reference there, the meaning of an undertaking. If you wish to read it, that's entirely recommended. Read if you really are suffering from insomnia. Okay. Now, the other thing, another important consideration is, in the boundary of an undertaking, is what is an undertaking? And where does one undertaking begin or end and another one begin? And think here of parent and subsidiaries, or think here of one company, one holding company, and you've got a German version of the company and a UK version of the company. Where does one undertaking begin and one undertaking end? An undertaking is not necessary. We'll back it up. The boundary of an undertaking is not coextensive with the legal boundary of a corporation. Okay? The separate legal entity of a corporation may put that let's back up. Even though one company, one corporation is a separate legal entity, that separate legal entity may be part of the same undertaking as another corporation or another legal entity. Okay? Do you see that? Okay. The key in European thinking is economic unit versus legal entity. Okay? An economic unit can consist of several natural or legal persons. Okay? So merely because you're dealing with two different legal persons, this does not mean you're dealing with two different undertakings. Okay? This is relevant to parent and subsidiary cases. If a subsidiary has no control of its own, then it's not a separate undertaking. Okay? This is important. Okay? We saw one of the first case was the Parker Pence case, the FIO Europe case. Okay. And this involved Parker Pence, where the subsidiary, the German subsidiary, was told to set the price of Parker pens at a specific amount. Okay. The subsidiary was effectively wholly controlled, and it had no input into that decision. It was wholly controlled by the parent and had no input into it. No freedom to do otherwise. Okay. The initial response was, oh, you've agreed with your parent to set the price there. This means that you fixed the price. Okay. That was the commission's initial claim. It went to the court, and the court said, no, this is not price fixing. Because the subsidiary and the parent, okay, were in a situation where the subsidiary had no control. It was not a separate undertaking. The subsidiary and the parent formed part of the same undertaking. Therefore, there was no violation. Okay? Because they form part of the same undertaking, you can't agree with yourself. Therefore, there was no agreement to fix prices. You see that? And of course, this has consequences for fines. Because if you look at the relevant articles of Regulation 1/2003, Articles 23 and 24, you'll see that fines, the maximum of a fine is set on the global turnover of the undertaking in question. So therefore, if a subsidiary commits an infraction, and the subsidiary and the parent are in the same undertaking, you can use the parent's turnover as the benchmark for fines. Okay. Furthermore, both the subsidiary and the parent, as separate legal entities, are responsible for paying the fine. Okay. And this we see, for instance, in the Arkema decision. Okay. Settled case law, the subsidiary may be imputed to the parent, where the subsidiary does not decide independently, acts on instructions given to it. Since the parent company and the subsidiary form a single economic unit, the commission can impose the fine on the parent. Okay, that's the Arkema case. Happens all the time. You'll see, for instance, in the Google cases, it'll be addressed to not just Google and one of the Google companies in Europe, but also the Google in Silicon Valley. And they use Google's global turnover as the benchmark for fines. That's why you get these whopping fines in the billions of euros. Okay. Agreement. Agreement is kind of key. Okay. An agreement is what it says. Okay. An intention, a joint intention to conduct themselves in a certain specific way. The Europeans use the phrase concurrence of wills. It's sort of akin to the common law notion of a meeting of the minds for a contract. Okay, a concurrence of wills. Okay. Now, usually, in prosecuting a 101 case where there's an agreement in question, the agreement is usually either reduced to writing, it's some form of distribution agreement or some form of contract that the parties thought was acceptable, turns out to be not acceptable. That's fairly easy to prove because you've got representatives of two undertakings signed a piece of paper. The other more difficult agreements are the clandestine agreements, the price-fixing cartels, okay, where the parties know, or at least those who implement the cartel, know what they're doing is illegal and conduct themselves in the same manner that a drug dealing conspiracy conducts themselves. In, hotel rooms, burner cell phone, prepaid cell phones, coded communication, that sort of thing. Then it's a bit more difficult, but as we will see, there are ways of inferring that this activity has taken place to find the agreement. Now, level of the market doesn't matter, okay? Horizontal agreements, that is to say, agreements between competitors who act at the same level in the distribution chain. Those are typically the most pernicious, the most harmful agreements. Those anti-competitive agreements at that level are prohibited. Similarly, vertical agreements, agreements between undertakings at different levels of the supply chain, are also within Article 101's restrictions. Okay? One of the first and the most significant cases is the Constant and Grundig case. Have a look at that. Okay? Do I mention it in this? I'm not going to mention it today, but have a look at that. What this case is, okay? I think it was the first competition case. Okay, it involved distribution of Grundig radios between France and Germany. Okay, and an attempt by Grundig to prevent sales by German dealers of Grundig products to French consumers. In other words, the French would drive across the border and try to buy the goods in Germany and then drive back to France to use them. Okay? What Grundig wanted to do was to have its distributors in France sell only to French people. Its distributors in Germany sell only to German people, okay, to reserve the market that way. Commission said, no, you can't do this. Fine, Grundig. Grundig went and appealed the Commission's decision. The appeal was on 2 grounds. Okay. First ground was a trademark issue, but the second ground was that the then equivalent, or the not equivalent, Article 85, which is word for word Article 101, Article 85 of the treaty didn't prohibit vertical agreements. Therefore, Grundig said what it was doing was perfectly legal. Okay. The court said, doesn't matter. In effect, it said, where in the treaty do you see vertical agreements are accepted? It says all agreements. That includes horizontal and vertical agreements. Okay. And so it prohibited the practice. Now, this is of significance. As I said a few minutes ago, horizontal agreements tend to be viewed as the most pernicious, or the most likely to cause competitive harm. Okay? As vertical agreements can sometimes have benefits and are viewed by economists as being, how should we say, not less likely, but yeah, as less likely to cause harm, okay, because of some of the benefits. We're going to see this throughout the discussion in 101 of vertical versus horizontal agreements. So there can be economic, how should we say, an economic distinction between the 2 types of agreements. But the law, on its face, treats both the same. But the way the law is enforced tends to treat vertical agreements slightly more leniently. The next phrase is concerted practice. Okay? A concerted practice. Okay? If you look at 101.1, anti-competitive concerted practices are also prohibited. A concerted practice is a form of coordination, okay, between undertakings that's just before the stage of agreement. So even though there's no explicit agreement, both parties know, have perhaps communicated or tipped each other off somehow, know what the other party's doing, and act accordingly. Okay? So you substitute practical cooperation for the risk of, how should we say, competition. Typically, a concerted practice involves providing information. Information that would otherwise be viewed as confidential. My future pricing plans, for instance. Okay. It's listed in the syllabus. The T-Mobile case is very interesting for concerted practice, as is the Dole case. Guess what Dole involved? Bananas. Okay? Dole and T-Mobile are very useful concerted practices. The T-Mobile case involved a meeting of marketing representatives of mobile phone companies in the Netherlands. Okay. And at one of these meetings, the representative from T-Mobile stated that next week they were going to reduce the commission that they're paying on selling phone contracts. So if you went to like a Phones R Us type store, they would sell you in addition to a phone, sell you a contract for the phone. T-Mobile announced at a meeting next week or in the near future, we're going to reduce this commission. Just blurted it out. Well, now, is there a problem with that? I should say, is there a problem with that? Of course there's a problem with that, otherwise it wouldn't be a court case. What's the problem with that?
Now the other company can act in turn. Even though they haven't reached an agreement now, they have that information and can act accordingly.
Exactly. Why would you blurt this out?
So that they act accordingly.
Exactly. You blurt this out in the hopes that other companies will make a similar reduction in their commission. You see that? So what are you doing? You're no longer vigorously competing, right? You've shared this information so that you can reduce the risk. Of competition in the hopes that your competitors, quote unquote, will cooperate with you. Okay, so you've reduced the uncertainty. Now you can look at the Bananas case, the Dole case.
Wait, so in cases like this with constructive practices, wouldn't then just meeting then cause this to happen? Because even without agreeing to anything, basically just having that information, if you act on it, then couldn't.
Yeah, I mean the whole thing. Okay, we're going to get to the response and the appropriate response. But yeah, first this calls into question. Are you asking why they had this meeting?
I feel like what I'm getting at is kind of like, so essentially, it's not having this information that's the problem. It's acting on this information.
It's.
So if you just tell me that information, if I don't act on it, I haven't done anything.
Okay, this is very interesting, and this is where a lot of people have are worried. I tell you that I'm dropping the commission next week, okay? And you just say, fine, that's good, and you do nothing. Actually, because you were given the information, the EU will view you as having acted on it, unless you distance yourself from it. Okay? Mm-hmm. So the view is, and I guess because the view is that if this information is shared, the sharing of the information is, from a commercial perspective, highly risky to the competitive operation of the market. Okay? And that the EU position is that because you have this information, because now you have this information, there may be a risk that you'll act on it. The thing for you to do is to distance yourself from it. Immediately send an email to everybody else saying this was shared. We're not going to act on it, but more significantly, do what T-Mobile's competitor did, and is inform the competition authority that this information was leaked out. We'll get to that this next week, okay? Because of it's sort of like I was actually thinking about this very point before class, walking over from my office. How do you best describe it? Perhaps like a drunk driver, okay? Drunk driver can get drunk and drive home, okay? And if they get home, no harm, all good, but we still criminalize that. Why? Because of the risk of harm. Okay? The sharing of information, I think, is criminalized on a similar basis because of the risk of harm. And to deter people from even thinking about sharing this information, even thinking about getting behind the wheel after you've had one half too many. You see, because of the risk of the harm to the market.
I guess that answers the second part then, because I was thinking, then what if, in terms of the person receiving the information, they realize that their business would be significantly harmed if they don't act on this
Yeah.
information?
No, what they have, they can't act on the information, and that they have to
Report it.
okay? And this is, this is what you do when, quite often, law firms, lawyers will give sort of compliance classes to people. We'll talk about sort of antitrust compliance. You may even wonder why the hell is T-Mobile sending these executives to these meetings. Cartels form in these meetings. Cartels form at trade fairs. So we'll talk about that next week, okay?
So you could almost call this like a reporting duty almost.
Yeah, not almost. There is an obligation. Okay, okay? Okay, we'll start, we'll continue with concerted practices tomorrow. I know we're a bit behind, whatever. Okay, I'm a bit relaxed about it. I'm not going to get unrelaxed until May. Okay? So see you tomorrow. So I'll see you in a few minutes then.
So I have